Hi everyone. Today we're looking at Lord's Day 34 of the Heidelberg Catechism. It goes like this. Question and answer 92. What is God's law? God spoke all these words. The first commandment, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. The second commandment, you shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents to the third and fourth generation of those who reject me, but showing love to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. The third commandment, you shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. The fourth commandment, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, but rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. The fifth commandment, honor your father and your mother, so that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. The sixth commandment, you shall not murder. The seventh commandment, you shall not commit adultery. The eighth commandment, you shall not steal. The ninth commandment, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. The 10th commandment, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or male or female slave, or ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Question and answer 93. How are these commandments divided? Into 2 tablets. The first has 4 commandments teaching us how we ought to live in relation to God. The second has 6 commandments teaching us what we owe our neighbor. Question and answer 94. What does the Lord require in the first commandment? That I, not wanting to endanger my own salvation, avoid and shun all idolatry, sorcery, superstitious rites, and prayer to saints or to other creatures. That I rightly know the only true God, trust him alone, and look to God for every good thing, humbly and patiently, and love, fear, and honor God with all my heart. In short, that I give up anything rather than go against God's will in any way. Question and answer 95. What is idolatry? Idolatry is having or inventing something in which one trusts, in place of or alongside the only true God who has revealed himself in the Word. So, as we progress into the gratitude section of the Heidelberg Catechism, the pivotal question is, okay, if the ethics of the Christian life are a grateful response to what God has done for us through Jesus Christ, what are the ethics of the Christian life? What are the key defining behaviors of God's covenant people, the church? And so the starting point is the Old Testament law. Now, in coming weeks, every Lord's Day will be devoted to a different one of the commandments. So we'll unpack them all in sequence. But for starters today, we get an overview of God's law spelled out in the 10 Commandments. And the basic gist of the 10 Commandments and all of our teaching related to it is the idea that God actually gives his people his commandments as an expression of his love. These are the template for human life. God the Creator says, this is the way you were created to live. And if you live the way I created you to live within my creation, you will flourish. So all of the both promises and warnings associated with the law, if you obey it, you will flourish. If you disregard it, life will unravel. These are mere statements of facts, statement of natural consequence. God's Old Testament law is, as it were, the owner's manual for human life in creation. If you disregard your car's owner's manual, eventually you'll wreck your car. The same is true for God's creation and human life within it. So God gives his people the law as a gift, as an expression of love, where he says, here, let me show you how best to live in the creation I made for you. But the law is also a means by which God's people can express love to God. In the New Testament Gospels, Jesus tells his disciples, if you love me, keep my commandments. God says the same thing to his people in the Old Testament. He says, look, the best way that you can express your love for me is just to live the way I command you to live. Paradoxically, that also becomes a gift to us. In expressing our love to God, we're actually living the best way that we can live. So that's kind of the overview of the function that God's law plays in the life of the community of believers. Of course, we get a summary of God's law in question and answer 93. Even if you don't remember all of the individual rules, there are two guiding principles. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and love your neighbor as yourself. Everything else sort of falls into line under these principles. The other thing that the Catechism does in today's Lord's Day, in Lord's Day 34, is deals with the first commandment regarding worshiping only one God and forbidding idolatry. And so we get an overview of what it is to worship God alone, and also a brief summary of what idolatry is. Idolatry is, of course, treating anything as though it has greater worth to you than God, or as though your life depends on it more than or alongside God and God's faithfulness and God's promises. To further expand on the teaching of the Catechism, we have today's Bible readings. And we start with Psalm 119, the first 16 verses of 119. For the next several weeks, we'll be looking at subsequent sections of Psalm 119, which it's the longest of the Psalms. It's really long. It's actually an acrostic poem. Every section of the poem follows one letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So the different subheadings are actually letters of the Hebrew alphabet. In Hebrew, that section, the first word of the first of each line of that section of the poem begins with that letter. So the Aleph section, the A section in Hebrew, every phrase of that section actually begins with the letter Aleph. So Psalm 119 is actually an extraordinary work of poetry, and its order and structure are designed to reflect the beauty of the order and structure of God's law. Just a little Hebrew side note here. But that's what Psalm 119 is, start to finish. It's a celebration of God's law. God's law not as something to be followed dutifully, not as an imposition on our life or a set of guidelines that interferes with the life you want to live, but actually as a gift that creates the foundation for true flourishing. And so we'll see that as we read the various sections, that it's just this celebration of the gift of God's law, start to finish. Next we go to Exodus 19, and this is the chapter right before God gives the law, where the Israelites have left Egypt and they assemble at Mount Sinai, and God's presence is palpable at the top of the mountain. And God says to his people, prepare to meet me and prepare to receive what I have for you. And specifically, God says, now if you obey me and fully keep this covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. He says, because you are my people, I'm going to give you my law. But if you want to continue to embrace your identity as my treasured possession, then live this way. It's an expression of my love, and it's your way to express love to me. In Leviticus 19, we see a chapter that spells out specific laws, but actually also captures that summary of the law. That is, that the law is love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. So Psalm 19 begins with, don't make idols for yourself, but then it goes on with a whole list of ethical commands for life and community. Love God, love your neighbor. Here's how you do it. In Matthew 22, we get Jesus' summary of the law. Jesus is asked, what's the greatest commandment? And he says, the greatest commandment is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law hangs on these two commandments. Finally, we turn to Revelation 19, which may seem a little strange at first. This occurs in the sequence of Revelation where the final battle has been won between the earthly forces of evil and Christ, the triumphant King. And so there's this song of celebration, both of the defeat of the evil forces on earth, but also celebration of God the triumphant. But at the very end of this passage, the Apostle John is the narrator of Revelation, and he's interacting with an angel who is showing him history unfold, almost like a book or a movie. And in Revelation 19, verse 10, John says, "At this point I fell at my feet to worship the angel, and the angel said to me, 'Don't do that. I am a fellow servant with you and your brothers and sisters who hold to the testimony of Jesus. Worship God alone.'" So this is a very vivid reminder that even though certain created things, including angelic beings, including some human beings, are overwhelmingly beautiful, majestic, powerful, even they are not worthy of worship because they're created. There is only one being in the universe worthy of our worship, and that is the one true God. And so religious traditions, for example, that talk about the worship of angels or elevate them above us actually are not informed by Scripture, run counter to Christianity, which says actually human beings and angels are made of different stuff, but we're on the same footing as fellow creatures whose main duty, the main point of our existence, is to know the living God and to worship Him. Anyway, that is our introduction to the Heidelberg Catechism's treatment of God's law. That's Lord's Day 34 in summary. As always, keep studying and keep the faith.